So today we host Leonardo Silva, a former agent of DEA. Thanks for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Uh, just in order to introduce what we do today, why does a Franco-Italian journalist interview one of the leading experts in organized crime between Mexico and the United States? The reason is simple. Italy, like Mexico, has large parts of territory controlled, at least economically, by organized crime. As in Mexico, cartels make money from illegal immigration and from the drug trade. But when we talk about drugs, it's obvious that we think of substances like cocaine, weed, but there are other chemical drugs, though. One of them is fentanyl. Leonardo Silva, can you briefly explain to us what is fentanyl and what it should be used for?
Yes, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that is used. It has a medical purpose. It's used to treat pain, especially after some major surgeries. It is a very potent painkiller, and it does have a legitimate medical use. But in the past few years, it's been used distributed on the black market for drug users and addicts, and it's highly addictive. And that's one of the reasons that it's become such a problem in the United States. It's highly addictive qualities.
Uh, Maybe I'm naive, but why do drugs cartels prefer a drug like this to a drug like cocaine, which is far more, in brackets, natural and that can be produced, for instance, in places or in countries like Colombia or South America at large?
Well, there's two parts, two answers to that question. So number one is now they can produce fentanyl themselves. They don't need to rely on Colombia or Peru to get their product. See, so basically they're cutting out the supplier and they're becoming their own supplier. So the bottom line is it's profits. Again, they they make these drugs in super labs down in Mexico and produce it themselves, and they ship it to the United States, and it's just more profitable. Bottom line, it's money, and it's highly addictive qualities. They actually create their own demand because once they use that drug fentanyl, it produces a very euphoric high for the user, and they keep chasing that high, and that's what makes it so addictive. And the traffickers know this, so once they get you hooked on this drug, they've pretty much got you. And in speaking, they create their own demand.
Is the production and distribution of fentanyl easier compared to cocaine, for instance?
Well, I wouldn't say it's easier. I mean, but it just cuts out that supplier. They can do it themselves. They have their own labs throughout Jalisco, Michoacan, Colima, and they produce it themselves. They get the products from China. They get the precursor products from China, bring it in, and they produce it themselves, and it's easier to distribute. It's less bulky, even though they do distribute it in kilogram amounts, which is really mind-boggling because with fentanyl, a dose of 2 milligrams is enough to kill a human being. So if you think of that, 2 milligrams, a kilo of fentanyl is enough to kill almost 500,000 people. So it's highly dangerous, and the problem is people don't know it. They're buying pills on the black market, for instance, oxycodone or Xanax, thinking, oh, it's just a Xanax, but it's laced with fentanyl sometimes, and that's where the danger lies.
900 people a week die from opioid-related overdoses. Deaths have spiked across the country amid the 2020 coronavirus pandemic. Meanwhile, millions more Americans suffer from opioid addiction. How did we come to this?
Well, it hit us by surprise because I don't think anybody took into account the highly addictive qualities of this drug. And like I say, they keep chasing that ultimate high, right? And sometimes, like I say, these guys that produce these drugs in Mexico, they're not exactly rocket scientists, so they don't know that 2 milligrams is enough to kill someone. So they may put in a little bit more than supposed to be in the drug, and that's what's causing all these problems and all these deaths. I believe in 2020 there was 90,000 deaths related to opioids and fentanyl specifically.
Is it possible to quantify the turnover of these illicit products?
Well, I know for a fact that the traffickers are producing meth at a quantity of almost a ton a day, maybe even more. Fentanyl, I don't know, I don't think it's that much, but just think about it. Even if it's half of that, I mean, 2 milligrams is enough to kill a person. So even if they produce 100 kilograms a day, that is just mind-boggling, because so many people can die from this drug.
Allow me a provocative question, but does the US government have the financial means to compete with logistics and the possibilities of organized crime, of criminal cartels?
Absolutely, they do. They just have to really apply themselves. And one of the things that holds the U.S. government back is we actually have laws we have to abide by, and there's other countries that are involved in this, and they're sovereign, and we can't just go into their country and impose our will. So, but yeah, absolutely, we do have the resources to combat this, and I think DEA right now is undertaking an initiative to try and put a stop to this. It's never going to stop, but maybe educating folks and putting more efforts into the China precursor distribution. It's called Operation Wavebreaker, and it's involving 11 states throughout the United States along the southwest border, New York, Detroit, Chicago, all these major cities. They're going to make a combined effort to focus specifically on fentanyl and stopping the distribution of fentanyl in the United States. So the resources are there.
Can you tell us a story, an anecdote related to an anti-drug operation in which you have participated or have heard of?
Oh, sure. There's many, but I recall one specifically when I was in Guadalajara. I was stationed in Guadalajara in 2002 to 2004. And back then, you didn't hear too much about the fentanyl and the methamphetamine coming into the United States, but we started to see it even way back then. And I was working a case with the federal police where there was precursors being brought into the airport in Guadalajara. And to make a long story short, we ended up seizing 2 tons of precursor chemicals there at the airport with the federal police. And the surprising part is there was 5 Mexican customs officers that were arrested as part of this scheme to bring in the precursors to produce methamphetamine. So I think back then we were seeing the initial onset of this crisis of methamphetamine and fentanyl, and we just didn't really know it. It was like a surprise to us, like 2 tons of pseudoephedrine that was going to be used to produce methamphetamine, and that was 18 years ago. So if they were bringing tons in back then, I can only imagine what they're doing now. So it's pretty mind-boggling to think about that.
Federal and state officials have attempted to reduce demand by focusing less on punishing drug users and more on treating them. Are we heading towards legalization?
I don't think so. Not with a drug like this or methamphetamine. It would be crazy. I think aside from law enforcement efforts, there needs to be more effort on educating our citizens as to how dangerous this drug is. I think if there's more awareness about the dangers of this drug, I mean, pretty much when they're taking one of these pills that they buy off the internet or on the street, you're playing Russian roulette with your lives. And I don't think people really understand that. There's been, like I say, there was 90,000 deaths in 2020 related to fentanyl. And I think a lot of these families were caught by surprise, because it's not your typical drug addict that you see on the street. I mean, I'm talking about student athletes, students that are, high achievers. And they got caught up in this, and they ended up passing away because of an overdose. So I think more education is needed for these people to understand that this drug is dangerous. one pill can kill. I mean, that's a good phrase to put it.
By your experience, have you ever heard the feeling that politics underestimated the risk associated with these drugs?
Absolutely.
At least at the beginning.
Absolutely, because even law enforcement was caught by surprise. I mean, we didn't see this coming at all. I've been retired for 5 years, more than 5 years already, but even back then we were starting to see the influx of this drug, and I think most of us were caught by surprise. We didn't think it would turn into a crisis that we're seeing now.
The opioid crisis also has specific responsibilities. In the past, they were prescribed to treat pain.
Yes.
So in recent years, they have been prescribed to patients who had undergone surgery, cancer treatment. But in the last 15 years, physicians increasingly prescribe them for chronic conditions. What are your thoughts on this? Is it too easy to get prescribed some fentanyl nowadays in the US?
Well, I think the DEA has done a good job in making it a little bit harder for these physicians to prescribe drugs like this. They've made a huge efforts in stopping these fake subscriptions. And there've been a lot of doctors that have been arrested and put in jail because of this process. So, I think DEA has done a good job, but it still exists. It is easy to get these drugs. You can get it on social media nowadays. You can go on Instagram, and there's always somebody out there selling it. So there's just, I think we got to do put a lot more effort into educating people how dangerous this is.
The components of this drug are relatively easy to find. Are we moving towards increasingly dangerous drugs made at home?
I think so. I mean, Mexico, these Mexican drug traffickers, they're very creative, and whatever's profitable, they're gonna roll towards that and push it out in large quantities. So that's something really scary, and I think this DEA initiative is going to address those issues, hopefully, and hopefully we won't get to that stage.
Here we try also to analyze the issues also from a European perspective, so to say. We also have an endemic problem in Europe, like in the United States.
Well, like I say, the traffickers, they go where the profits are. And if they see a market that's viable there, I see it happening. I mean, that bottom line, these guys are looking for the all-American dollar, man. And if they see a profit in Europe, they're gonna start distributing out there as well. And that's probably an untapped market. I'm sure they're already looking into it to see if it's viable. And if it is, you can guarantee that you're gonna see it.
As I say at the beginning of our conversation, I'm of Italian origin, and I know because I've been living for many years in parts of the country where organized crime was and is extremely powerful. Have you ever had the impression that I say our Italian cartels, so to say, are also active and collaborating with Mexican cartels?
I've seen that in the past. When I was in Monterrey, there was an offshoot of the Gulf cartel that was connected to Ndrangheta, and it was a big case. The Mexican cartels were transporting cocaine and in conjunction with Ndrangheta, and yes, I do believe that there's that liaison there between Italian organized crime and Mexican cartels. Definitely, yes. I've seen it.
It struck a bit like a surprise that you mentioned Ndrangheta. Ndrangheta is not even an Italian word; it's a dialect word,
right.
And it's probably the most mysterious and unknown cartel among the Italian ones. Criminals, but also men. What kind of people are these kind of criminals? What kind of people are Ndrangheta men or Mexican cartel associates?
These guys, what I've seen in my experience, it's all about the money and power. Power is something that drives these guys. That's what I've seen in my experience. And it's a very good question because as I've said before on past shows, I am writing a book, and it's a question that I throw out there in my book. It's like what kind of background did these guys have to lead them to this kind of life? It's a very interesting question, it's a mystery. I don't know what kind of background they've had that would lead them down this road, to such a violent road, to not having any regard for mankind. It's just very, very interesting to wonder about that. But basically, what these guys are driven by is power and money, and nothing else matters.
And allow me to say something about myself. I've been traveling a lot to Colombia and South America at large, and at the beginning, at least, of my travels, I've been asked to bring something to Europe, or to bring something to the US. Of course, I said no, because I perfectly knew the risks and illegal request. But about this, I mean, I have a decent job. I am relatively well paid. How is it possible to convince people that have to struggle day after day not to get involved in drugs from the Mexican side? And how is it possible to talk to youngsters, to young people in the US, by telling them it's not only bad, it's not only illegal what you do, it's also dangerous for yourself and for your fellow ones?
Yes, it's something that I wish that I could answer. I mean, it's really hard, especially in Mexico. There's a lot of poverty, and it's really hard to try to convince somebody that lives in poverty like this, and barely gets by, if at all, not to get involved in organized crime, because you got organized crime coming in and offering to pay more than what their parents will make in a whole week, in one day. So it's very attractive for them to go and join, the Zetas or the Gulf Cartel, or whatever cartel is out there, because of the stigma attached to being in a cartel, with the gun and the women and the cars and the horses and the alcohol and everything. And then you also have music that kind of glorifies the Mexican trafficker, and these guys, these kids, they see it, and they aspire to be something like that. And so it's very hard. It's very hard to convince them not to be involved in something like that. It's a huge challenge for the citizens of Mexico, and here in the United States as well. And that's why I'm saying I think more needs to be done towards education of kids and at-risk youth, to see the dangers in these drugs, and being involved in the cartel. Because in the cartel, either you're going to be in jail or you're going to die sooner or later. That's just the way it is. There's no other way out.
Europe has always been considered or seen from abroad as a giant with feet of clay. But do you have the feeling that Europe, as the European Union, wants to work together with U.S. police in order to have a multilateral and multinational force to face this kind of problem? Because what I've seen is that at least Italian cartels are global. They are extremely strong locally, but also globally. And sometimes they are far more able to start partnerships with other cartels from all over the world. Countries or governments are sometimes not so able to.
Yes, well, like I say, if there's a profit involved, they're going to find a way to do this. And DEA has offices all over the world, and we try to establish liaison with our counterparts in different countries all over the world, and it's a challenge as well. In Mexico, it's a huge challenge. It's even worse now with AMLO passing this legislation that all Mexican officials need to report any contact with any agent from the United States. it just makes it harder to combat, the narcotics flow with stuff like that in place. But countries like Europe, we have offices in Paris, France, and Italy, in places all over the world, even in Russia and China. So we try to establish this liaison with our counterparts to put together a sort of worldwide effort to stop the flow of these narcotics and precursors coming into the country, not just our country, but the host country.
And talking about the US, what should politics do to find a solution right now in the next few months, in the next few years?
Well, I think right now this initiative taken by DEA is a good step. It's a step in the right direction, but more needs to be done. I think somebody needs to be up there in charge of educating the public about this. I think if there's more education about the dangers of fentanyl and methamphetamine, maybe it'll help a little. I'm not saying it's the solution to everything, but it's a step in the right direction, and we've got nothing to lose by trying to do something like this.
Thank you very much for this interview. And before we end this interesting conversation, can you tell us something about about your book? At least give us an headline.
Yes. Well, the deadline, I'm not sure about the deadline. I'm working on it. But
the deadline and a headline.
The headline is called Reign of Terror, Reino de Terror, and it's about my time when I was in Monterrey, and our team was with the Mexican police and the army and the navy, trying to apprehend the Zeta leader Miguel Treviño, and it was a very challenging time. We lost a lot of friends along the way. As you know, in Mexico, from 2009 to around 2014, there was a big war between the Zetas and the Gulf Cartel, and we were right in the middle of it. Monterrey was ground zero for that war, and basically that's what my book is about. And it's been challenging to write. It seems like every time I write something about it, I relive those times, and that's pretty challenging.
Leonardo Silva, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.